All right, we're beginning. Well, good morning. Happy Friday to everyone. This is our third consecutive Friday webinar regarding kind of relative to FAFSA and FAFSA reporting, and specifically this one's going to be about what reports can you access via GRandS to help you along the Tennessee Promise and FAFSA submission/completion process. So as we begin on the initial slide about first, maybe a little, what is GRandS, right? So first, GRandS is our system at TSAC that was developed, I'm going to say now years ago, over a decade ago, specifically when the Hope Scholarship was created. So we're talking about 2003, 2004. This system was created to help our colleges in administering the Hope Scholarship Program, but then all of TSAC programs like TSAA, like the Ned McWhorter Scholars Program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So guys, with that in mind, when GRandS was developed, understand back then there was really only one web browser in use, and that web browser was Internet Explorer, because we kind of lived then more in a PC world. Apple had not, I'm going to say, quite taken off, at least globally, like it has to date. So we begin there by saying this, and right before Marianelle and I began, as a reminder with GRandS as of today, all right, please use Internet Explorer in order to access GRandS, okay? Internally, we are working to finally move the system to become compatible with all web browsers, but that's still down the road. But down the road's quickly approaching, because if you were not aware, Internet Explorer is actually being discontinued by Microsoft, I believe, by 2020. So what that means, here we are in 2018, that means sooner rather than later, we're going to have to get our IT is working on getting GRandS and I guess the programming updated so that it becomes compatible with all web browsers. So that would be Chrome, Safari, Microsoft Edge, et.cetera. So I kind of wanted to begin there to say, as a potential user for GRandS, when you do utilize it, you should be using Internet Explorer. Obviously, that's difficult for some school users, because you may only be an Apple school, and so those schools, typically what I encourage is, hey, reach out to me or reach out to your outreach specialist, and then we can send you these reports whenever you request them. All right, so that said, how do you access GRandS? So I would have you to go to www.tn.gov/collegepays. As you know, this is our quote-unquote, the TSAC site, where you can find all the information about all of our financial aid programs. But once you get to College Pays, if you scroll to the bottom of the screen, under important links, you will have GRandS user access. So that is where you will click to then go to the GRandS site. And so upon reaching the GRandS site, as a user, this is where you would enter your username and then your password as well. If you are a school user and this is the first time you have heard of GRandS and therefore you may not have an account, I would encourage you to follow up with me, and we can set you up an account. But looking at who is on this call, I think many of you already have an GRandS account. But again, if you do not, or if there's someone within your school that needs access, they can begin with me, and we can begin going down that road of getting you GRandS access. Once you are in GRandS, the first report we're going to talk about is the Tennessee Promise Report, because here we sat. It's Marianelle, forgive me. It's October 19th. The 19th, all right. So November 1 is our Tennessee Promise deadline. So many of you may be wanting to access your Tennessee Promise Report. So again, once you are in GRandS, if you will click, Marianelle, click. If you will click to the left-hand side of the screen once you're in, if you click New Reports, And then you will then have displayed a select report screen where you will click specifically the scholarship application status report - Tennessee Promise. This is your Tennessee Promise report. Once you click there, this will open up a new window. So FY, depending on your computer, and then depending on what school you might be at, sometimes pop-ups are blocked. So what that means is you may have to go in and click always allow pop-ups, and that may require you to actually kind of repeat steps 1 and 2 of clicking new reports and clicking on the Tennessee Promise to then finally get this pop-up to appear. But within this report, guys, as you select, you will want to select the 1920 year because, you know, again, as your students are completing the Tennessee Promise application, they are specifically completing the 1920 application, which aligns with the 1920 FAFSA that they are also completing. So, you know, I understand we are in the 18-19 academic year, but for this report purposes, think, you know, they're doing the 1920 Tennessee Promise application. So that's what you would select as the AC year. You would then click View Report, and then finally, that's right, Mary. And then finally, you would click on the little diskette and select how you would like to download the report, whether that's on PDF, Excel, etc. Once you select that, this is what the Tennessee Promise report looks like. You know, basically right now when you're looking at this Tennessee Promise report, you're basically looking to see the names of the students that have done it. So in other words, you know, if Mary Nell and Jason's names appear on this report, that simply means that they have completed step 1 of the Tennessee Promise process, which is the actual completion of the Tennessee Promise application. Mary Nell, if we will, let's actually stay here just for a second and talk about a little bit, a couple of things. You're okay, you're okay. Mary Nell, always thank you for helping me guide this PowerPoint. But that said, a few things as you look on this. I mean, again, the biggest thing is look at the names. Make sure your names are on, or the names of the students that have submitted the report are on there. I'm going to say a couple of reminders here, things that we have come across. So for our students that perhaps, depending on the school, and all about depending on the school, I'm going to use Mary Nell and I an example. Here's something I have found. If Mary Nell is in a computer lab and she logs into a computer and if she submits a Tennessee Promise application, all right, and then if Jason follows behind Mary Nell, sits at the same computer, but Mary Nell doesn't log off, and if Jason goes in, creates Jason's account, and then goes to submit the Tennessee Promise application, one thing I have noticed at certain schools using certain web browsers, I think honestly Chrome, and this is with the TSAC student portal, what sometimes I have seen is when Jason submits his Promise app right after Mary Nell on the same computer that Mary Nell logged into but never logged out of, sometimes what we will find is Jason's last name on the Promise application will update to reflect Mary Nell's last name. And so in other words, as you review your report, if you see a, you know, Jason with a different last name and you're like, whoa, I don't know, I don't have this Jason. Guys, it could be where this issue has happened where I don't know if it's a temporary file issue or a cookie issue or cache or cache, however you pronounce that. We need to figure out how to pronounce that, by the way, Mary Nell. Or I need to figure out how to pronounce that, C-A-C-H-E. That could be an issue that you and I may want to investigate together, because again, that's something I can update. I had this example yesterday at a school that called and had a student, Jason, I know such and such has submitted the Promise application, but I only have that one student on the report, but the last name's is incorrect. And so when we logged in and the counselor and I discussed it, what we finally ended up figuring out is the student before that student submitted the application, when then the second student submitted the promise application, he or she inherited that last name. That's a system glitch. I'm not sure if that's a portal issue. I think that's actually a Chrome auto-populate issue in this case. So just FYI as you review this report. The other thing about the report right quick is, and this is a good reminder about the 1920 FAFSA, TSAC has not begun downloading the 1920 FAFSA yet. I understand we now are 3 weeks basically in the FAFSA season, but again, we have not begun downloading the 1920 FAFSA yet because we're still testing GRandS with the new file layout from the 1920 FAFSA. Some of you have emailed me and I've responded saying we hope to conclude that testing soon. I think I even, for some, even said we might be done with testing as of today, but I've not received official word if that's true. But the bottom line is, once we begin downloading the 1920 FAFSA, then at this point you could also use your Tennessee Promise Report to ascertain which students have successfully submitted the Tennessee Promise application, where when you see that FAFSA column like you see on the slide, that N would be updated to reflect Y once the 1920 FAFSA has been received, and then there would be a date right next to it in terms of the FAFSA app date. So that's another good use out of this Tennessee Promise Report, all right? So Marinelle, next slide. Now we're actually going to talk about your FAFSA report. So same thing, when you first log into GRandS, or even let's say after you pull your Promise Report, if now you want to pull your FAFSA by high school report, then first thing you'll do is you'll click New Reports again, and then once you land on the Select Report screen, you will select FAFSA by high school. That will yet again bring up this box where you will select 1920, which aligns with the 1920 FAFSA, and then you'll select 2019 as the grad year of these students. You'll then click View Report, and then finally you'll be prompted to click the diskette to save the report in whatever format you so choose. Now, as I just alluded, we have not begun downloading the 1920 FAFSA yet. So this is an actual screenshot of the 1920 report for 19 grads, but as you see, it's blank. Well, it's blank because, again, we have yet to begin downloading 1920 FAFSA. The idea of this report, I think the two things where this report becomes very useful for a professional, a school counselor, is this specific report will reflect the, and you notice the two columns I've highlighted here, the blank EFC column and then the FAFSA verification column. As a state, as we shift more and more to now worrying about completion, right, which actually means that that student has submitted a FAFSA where an EFC has generated. Guys, when you hear a submitted FAFSA talked versus a completed FAFSA, a completed FAFSA is one where an EFC has generated, all right? So that blank EFC column on this report, if there is a no, we'll do that. If there's a no in the blank EFC column, and guys, I'm pausing and I'm actually closing my eyes. Marinelle sees I'm closing my eyes because I'm thinking through this. If there's a no in the blank EFC column, that means that an EFC has generated, that student's FAFSA is good to know. On the other hand, if there's a yes in the blank EFC column, so does the student have a blank EFC? Yes, that means an EFC was unable to generate. That means the student has an issue with his or her FAFSA. That means the student should be communicated, Marinelle, you need to return to your FAFSA, check to see what issues you have. It could be a missing signature issue, or it could be an issue where, it could be a lot of issues. It could be an issue, I say a lot, missing signature, it could be where perhaps the parent and student reported the same income information, meaning You know, parent indicated that he or she made $75,000 and also indicated for the student that the student made $75,000. That typically is not going to be right, right? It could be other issues as well, but again, on this report, not to confuse anyone, so let's kind of clear it up here. You're looking to see, does the student have a yes in the blank EFC column? If he or she does, that means there's a FAFSA issue.
So just to clarify further, this report is going to show me a list of all of my students or just my Tennessee Promise applicants?
So Marinelle, great question. This is where we might get in the weeds a little bit. I apologize, guys. The issue with this FAFSA report. So first, in theory, it should show all students, period, all students. This FAFSA report, all students. The issue with, quote, all is this. This report relies upon the successful connection in eGrandS between the student's FAFSA and his or her test record, ACT, SAT. Folks, think about this. Nowhere on the FAFSA does it ask for a graduation date. It simply asks, you know, what will your high school completion status be as you enter the 1920 year, or what is your grade level, you know, as you enter the 1920 year, right? Nowhere on that does it ask when did you actually graduate. Where that information comes from is the student's ACT or SAT. So Marinelle, as you are well versed in, you know, now working alongside me all these years, you know, the problem, folks, is ACT, SAT have both moved away from Social Security numbers. So guys, understand what happens. As we receive FAFSAs, our system then begins looking to automate the connection between the ACT test record and FAFSA, where if the student only has one test record in her system that is coded with something other than his or her social, if there's only one test record and like the student's name and date of birth matches what's on the FAFSA, then the system has been is going to manually override that test record's ID number with the social on the FAFSA. The problem is a lot of our students take multiple ACTs, and each successive ACT will have its own unique ID number, right? So if Jason C takes the ACT multiple times, even though Jason C is Jason C and used the same date of birth on each exam, ACT doesn't really assume that. So they assign each test a different ID number. What happens at that example, then our staff downstairs has to manually update those. So my point, Marinelle, to your question, it was a great one, is sometimes this report's not perfect or it's imperfect because you're relying sometimes on us to manually marry records when we've got over, you know, 60,000 records to go through to potentially manually marry if the automation does not work.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. But I do think, if I understood correctly, for the students that are showing up in this report, it has the added utility of being able to tell if those students who have submitted a FAFSA actually have it completed.
Correct.
So even though all of your students may not be there yet,
yes,
you can still look
absolutely
for the ones that do show up, right?
Yes, absolutely. And again, and to, I guess, ascertain which students specifically have FAFSA issues on this report, look at the blank EFC column, look for a yes. If there's a yes in the blank EFC column, that means there's an issue with the student's FAFSA. At that point in time, your instruction should be, student, we need to log back in your FAFSA, review the student aid report to see what is the issue. The second important thing on the screen is the FAFSA verification column. So again, you're looking for a yes in this column because that will tell you that that student's FAFSA has been selected for the process that we all so love of FAFSA verification. So again, a useful tool for you to kind of give these students that are selected a heads up, you know, as you work with them in the spring semester specifically, you know, January, February, March, April, you know, again, if Jason's selected FAFSA verification, if I have the time and I'm pulling this report, I'm letting Jason know, hey, heads up, you've been selected for FAFSA verification. Your college should be communicating what that process is and what you and your family needs to do to satisfy that process. You know, as you guys probably understand, verification oftentimes is one of those barriers that some of our students, just because they don't know any better, they wait till June, July, and August to begin the process. And more and more, that's just honestly almost too late to begin that process, right? So that's the other useful utility out of this report. Now, one thing I'm going to use the word tease here. One thing I have asked, because of the potential limitations of the FAFSA report, meaning it can be for all, but again, the issue with the ACT and having to connect with the FAFSA and stuff like that. One thing I have asked is to have these two columns actually to be on the promise report, right? Because with the promise report, as long as the student's submitting the promise application, assuming they're using the correct social on the promise report, once that FAFSA has been submitted, assuming this student uses the same social on the FAFSA, right, then that promise report is capturing, hey, the student's done the FAFSA. Well, to me, what would be even better is let's have that blank EFC and verification columns on the promise report. So, especially for schools that do have like basically 100% promise submission, then the promise report becomes honestly more of an accurate tool as opposed to having to wait for the FAFSA. So my tease here is, folks, is I've asked for these two columns to be placed also on the Tennessee Promise Report. But understand, I've asked. Nothing's been updated yet. So if and when that happens, then you might just solely be pulling your promise report if all your kids are doing the promise application, right? Obviously, if you're a school where maybe some of your students don't do the promise app, but they do the FAFSA, then the FAFSA report will still be necessary for you. The other report that we're just going to go into, this is under the other report option, where the first two reports are found under the new reports tab, box, whatever you want to call it. These reports are found under the reports box. So, boom, thank you. So when you click on reports, you see these two tabs under, just FYI, under the activity reports tab that you see on the screen. That's where you can actually download your dual enrollment grant report, right? So just FYI, if you ever want to find and look at your dual enrollment grant report, click on activity reports, and that's where you'll find that. But specifically under your high school reports, guys, here there are three different options. This is actually where you can pull your dollar numbers of how many students are eligible, whether it's for HOPE or TSAA or HOPE with Aspire, HOPE with GAMS, HOPE Access, Wilder NAFI, where you can pull individually like a totals report. And so for those of you that have to report numbers to your school district, you know, at a certain time, this is a great way where you can find out these numbers by looking at these reports in the system. And so, you know, an example here, you know, if you click high school reports and like click eligible students by high school report, in this case, if you're wanting to see who from the class of 18 who enrolled in college in 18-19 received a HOPE scholarship, right? These are all the different things that you can select, and then ultimately select the generate report to generate that report to see who was eligible for the HOPE scholarship, for example, and their total dollar amount that class received. And again, like in the program or along the program, you're good. Along the program, I mean, you can toggle between our various TSAC programs: HOPE, Wilder NAFI, TSAA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that, you know, this has been in there for years, and Mary Nell, you made a comment yourself. Though I think you probably know a lot about eGRandS just hearing me, but you've actually never seen or been in eGRandS, and so this is something that's been around forever. I'm just glad that we now have this format where we can communicate this information, that this is one place where you can find these totals. And especially at the end of the year, you know, one of your last assignments before you leave for summer break is to report these digits, after you do, your HOPE Scholarship GPA entry, whether you're using National Student Clearinghouse and the electronic transcript exchange that our colleague Suzette Telley, leads for us here at TSAC, or if you're a school that still has to manually enter GPAs through GRandS, through that Verify Students tab that you see on the left-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, after you've completed these tasks, you can pull these eligible student reports. That's what you could submit your district to give them a specific dollar amount of what your students are eligible for from a TSAC aid program perspective. So Marianelle, that's actually really the three reports I wanted to go over today. Guys that are online, any questions for me?
If you have questions, we'll hang out here for another minute or so. You can type them in the chat or the Q&A box.
I like the pause right now. The pause. No,
I do have a question.
Yeah.
How long does it typically take students to appear in the report?
All right. No, this is a great question. So Tennessee Promise, it's instantaneous. So like today, if you are doing a Tennessee Promise workshop, literally the second after a student submits the Tennessee Promise application, if you logged into GRandS, downloaded that Tennessee Promise report, you would instantaneously see on the Promise report that that student has successfully submitted the Tennessee Promise app. From a FAFSA perspective, as a reminder, once the FAFSA is submitted, it generally takes, up to 72 hours for it to process. So what that means is once it processes, generally speaking, after that 3-day window, then the ICER, as we call it, the FAFSA record, then that's released to the colleges and to TSAC. And so in other words, by day 4, day 5, that's when the students should receive credit for submitting that FAFSA. Now, just FYI, there are a couple, or there's one thing that I'm thinking about in my head right now. For our families, our students who, let's say, are citizens, but who have mom and dads that do not have a status and had to submit a signature page to FAFSA in order to process that student's FAFSA, for those students, it may be weeks, it may take weeks for them to finally appear on the report because, right, it's going to take longer for that specific FAFSA to process. So again, Promise instantaneous, meaning submit the Promise application, that student should instantaneously appear on a Promise report. For FAFSA, I'm saying 4 or 5 days minimum. It's going to take for FAFSA submitted to have that student get credit for submitting it. Obviously, longer for our students whose parents are without papers. So there's that.
Okay, one question from our group. How do you correct an incorrect last name on the Promise report?
So I think this is I can say, Cameron, that's a great question. I would say email me just so I can investigate why. If it's as I outlined earlier, which could be a Chrome issue where assuming the student created his or her account correctly with the last name, but then once they were in the application, Chrome did the autofill and just happened to autofill the last name of the student before who just submitted the Promise for this student. Technically, that's something the student could go back into the Promise app and correct, but Cameron, as you might imagine, sometimes there's simply an issue of the student creating the account with the wrong last name, and if that happens, that's something I have to correct. So again, Cameron, it's just probably easiest if you just send me the name to me, right? The incorrect, like Jason, here's the incorrect name, here's what it should be. I'll investigate and I'll change it. It's probably easier if I do it. I guess the other thing, just while we're sitting here, just thinking about other things, guys, just heads up. I mean, bless their hearts, but other issues that we see our students sometimes do. Sometimes they select the wrong high school. And so if you have a student that's missing from your report, but that he or she, or you think he or she did submit the Promise app, again, I would kind of start with me or your outreach specialist to investigate, because sometimes it could be they're selecting the wrong high school. I'll give you a perfect example. You know, in Nashville, we have John Overton High School. In Memphis, we have Overton High School. Well, guess what? In Nashville, our Nashville students, they refer to John Overton High School as Overton. So we have a lot of our Nashville kids that select Overton from the list. Well, but that's actually Memphis, Overton. And so you do have issues like that. And then sometimes it's just, you know, students just not paying attention. They select your high school, and then as they move to the next question, they scroll or they do something that accidentally moves from, you know, Riverdale to Riverside, right? Oops, that's a mistake that they made. And so that's another mistake. So again, anytime a student's missing from that report, definitely, you know, send that to me or an outreach specialist, and we can investigate that for you as well.
Well, I don't have any other questions, and we're at exactly 30 minutes, so I will shut it down. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. We will post this recording on the College for TN website on the Money for College tab if you want to revisit it or share it with anyone in the future. So thank you so much, Jason.